because of the tariff policy, the United States has become a lot less attractive as an investment location also for our companies, because of a lot of investment goods like machinery still needs to be imported to the United States for companies to build their production plants in the United States.
Donald Trump as the negotiator means obviously everything is untraditional, everything is different than it ever has been. Negotiations with Trump have no beginning, middle, or end.
Good deal or bad deal? Businesses in Europe are taking a close look at the new framework trade agreement announced by the EU and U.S. President Donald Trump on the weekend. Well, Melanie Vogelbach is head of international trade policy and foreign trade law at the German Chamber of Commerce, and she joins me for more. Melanie, thanks so much for coming along. First of all, is this a good deal or a bad deal?
Hi, Stephen. Thanks for having me. So first of all, it is a good news that the EU and the US have come to an agreement to avert an escalation in the trade conflict, which could have become a real trade war. So that is the good news. The German economy can take a breath for now, at least for the time being. Yet we have to be honest that the deal does come at a price, and the price clearly is also at the expense of the German economy.
So in other words, good news that there is an agreement, but the agreement itself may not be what Germany and Europe in particular would want. What concretely does 15% tariffs, this is a baseline for many areas, and of course, we should acknowledge this is a framework agreement. There's a lot of things we don't yet know. Can you give us an idea of what 15% means for German businesses looking at the U.S. market?
Well, we have to remember that before the beginning of this year, before the trade conflict under the Trump presidency started, the average tariff rate for US imports from the EU was at about 2%. And to now have a baseline tariff of 15% obviously does make our products, our exports to the US market much more expensive and a lot less competitive compared to local production.
Could the EU not have gotten more? You focus on trade, you focus on these kind of negotiations. The EU isn't without a weapon in this case. There's obviously trade going both ways. Why did it seem to, some would say, buckle?
Well, trade negotiations are always very complicated and multi-layered, and the EU was certainly under a lot of pressure to conclude a deal and to prevent the threat of higher tariffs. So 15% does sound like a lot. It is a lot more than the average tariff rate that we did have in the past, also more than the 10% tariff base tariff that President Trump introduced a couple of months ago. So it is quite a lot, yet it is also much less than it could have been with the escalation of a trade tariff. The Trump administration threatened a tariff of 30%. There was also talks about a 50% tariff rate for all European imports at one point. So it always depends on from what perspective you look at it. And the threat of a trade escalation, the weapons, so to say, that you mentioned that the EU does have at its disposal, they also very often do come at the expense of our own companies here in the European market. So had we introduced counter tariffs, countermeasures, they would have also been with negative consequences to our companies and consumers here in the European Union.
You talked about the perspective when it comes to these kind of trade negotiations. Brussels negotiates trade agreements on behalf of all 27 members, but we can say that Germany in particular needed this kind of deal. Is that fair to say?
Well, for Germany, as for most European countries, the US is our most important export market. It is our most important trading partner overall worldwide, and it is the most important location for our foreign direct investments outside of the European Union. And with high tariffs, also in important sectors, apart from the 10% baseline tariff that we had in recent months, we also had a 25% tariff on European cars, which obviously made a huge negative impact on the German car industry. We had 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum. So there was already a lot of negative impact that we saw with regards to the tariffs that had already been introduced. We at DIHK, the German Chamber of Commerce and Industry, we calculated that every month those tariffs that had already been in place, they would cost our economy about 1 billion euros. So that is a lot of money. And so we were very much hoping for a deal. This might not be the very best outcome that we might have hoped for. But what is good is that an escalation was prevented. And we very much hope that this deal could bring a little bit more of planning security for German companies, because that's what we had been seeing in recent months, that a lot of companies were worried because tariff rates were announced and changed from one week to the other. And there was very little planning security and very little security with regards to framework conditions for European companies in the US market.
German concerns, one could argue, may not perfectly overlap with the concerns of other member nations. When we look at France, for example, agriculture is a big issue there. Is there a concern that some of these issues about how certain sectors are covered could then lead to more turmoil within the EU when it comes to accepting this deal?
Well, the European Commission does negotiate those deals for all 27 member states. And obviously there's different economic structures in different countries and different up and downsides on any deal that could be made that affect different industries in different ways. But we don't know all of the details at this point. There's also been negotiated a 0 for 0 tariff rate for certain products, also in the agricultural sector and the chemical industry, and with regards to airplanes and airplane parts, apparently. But we haven't seen all the details, not the fine print of the deal, so it remains to be seen what consequences there really will be. I think it is important that the European Union sticks together, that European nations do rally behind the European Union, because only as a trading bloc we do have the negotiation power that we do need with regards to those hard negotiations. And I think it is high time for us to look at the resilience of the European market itself. There are still barriers in the inner market that we can reduce, that will make Europe for us even more important. Right now, already more than 50% of our German exports go to other European countries in the inner market. And there's even more potential that will make us a lot more resilient at this point. And there are also a lot of other countries in the world, other markets that we can look at. 90% of our German exports, even more than 90%, go to other countries outside of the US. And so it's really important that we reduce barriers there. Trade agreements with countries like Mercosur or regions like Mercosur, Indonesia, India, those will also create new opportunities for European companies in the months to come.
You mentioned the car tariffs. They were at, I believe, an effective rate of 27.5%. Now they would fall to 15% under this framework agreement. Still, a lot is left to be seen, as we've mentioned before. That's still pretty high. Will that not encourage more investment in the U.S. instead of here in Europe, and then potentially affect a lot of jobs in Germany, where the auto industry is a major employer and already going through difficult times with this transition to electric?
Well, as I said earlier, the United States is a very attractive investment location for German companies from the get-go. So in recent years, German companies have invested a lot of money. It was the most important investment location outside of the European Union for German companies. And so that's apart from any political deals that are being made. Now there's also part of that deal, apparently a commitment of $600 billion of European investments in the United States. It remains to be seen how that is supposed to really be followed through. who will be supposed to make those investments and in what kind of time frame. Those details we haven't seen yet. What I can say about investments, that in recent months, because of the tariff policy, the United States has become a lot less attractive as an investment location also for our companies, because of a lot of investment goods like machinery still needs to be imported to the United States for companies to build their production plants in the United States. And so since we have now a 15% tariff on European machines, from the European machinery sector, manufacturing sector, this will also affect industrial investments in the United States.
You touched on this briefly, Melanie, but what political message does this send to Berlin and to Brussels about trying to make their economies much more competitive? And is it realistic? These talks have always been around about more consolidation, more moving capital more easily throughout the union. Do you expect something to actually happen now, or is it just going to sort of be another kind of period of discussion and then it goes away?
Well, it certainly is a wake-up call, even more now, to do our homework at home. So we have to make Germany, we have to make Europe more competitive. We have to reduce burdens of bureaucracy. We have to deal with the structural challenges that we have been facing here even before this trade conflict has started. But to make our market more competitive, we really have to start with the economic policy back home in Germany and Europe overall. We have to reduce also trade barriers in the inner market. There's lots that needs to be done, and to give German companies the opportunity, European companies, to diversify their supply chains, to diversify their export markets. We do need several new trade agreements with other regions of the world. There are a lot of trading partners that are looking to have rules-based trade agreements where we agree on low tariffs, zero tariffs even. That should be the goal, and so we can also focus on other partners that we can still trade with and have lots of investments also in other areas of the world.
All right, that's Melanie Vogelbach with the German Chamber of Commerce. Melanie, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Let's go a little bit deeper into this framework EU-US tariff agreement with a look at how one specific sector in Germany could be affected. Andrew Adair focuses on North American trade for the German Machine Builders Association. That's a sector that represents everything from lasers to tool machining to robotics, excuse me, and plenty of other things that I haven't mentioned. Andrew, welcome. You know, a 15% surcharge on your products heading into the U.S., Germany's single most important export market when you look at the value of trade. Your organization, however, says this is a necessary deal. Why is that?
Well, I'm not sure if we said it's a necessary deal, but it is just the reality that we're living in. And we have Donald Trump is our interlocutor, and these are the circumstances that we find ourselves in. So I think the alternative of having a 30% tariff on one hand, which would be a lot worse, and then the prospect of countermeasures from the EU, which would also impact us, is a lot worse. So in that sense, we're pleased that there is at least a measure of certainty going forward for us with respect to our American customers.
15% is still a lot when it comes to a surcharge on products going into the U.S. What concretely does that mean for your businesses, can we say?
Yeah, I mean, it is a lot. I mean, really for generations, machinery products have enjoyed very low tariffs in the United States. In many cases, zero tariff. So we've never had a free trade agreement with the United States, but our industry has done very well in the United States, in part because there are such good conditions. However, we've also done very well because our technology is unique. Many of the products that we put in the market are not available in the U.S. market domestically, so they have to look abroad to source these products, either to Europe or to Asia. And Germany has done extremely well in this area of machinery and machine building. So 15% additional tariff, of course, some customers in the United States will experience higher prices. There's no two ways about that. what sort of direct impact that has on pricing, of course, depends on the branch. As you mentioned, we're talking about high tech, we're talking about food processing, we're talking about also automotive, where so many different producing branches. So every branch is set up a little bit differently. Energy, oil and gas, et cetera. So it will just have to depend on the branch, but it is a burden on our commercial relations with our American partners, but it is not going to destroy the market for us.
As you said, some customers will have to pay more. Maybe they can't find this technology elsewhere. Others may try and buy it cheaper from Asia. Have we not seen that in the past few years, Chinese competitors in particular are trying to eat away at the German market, in particular for machinery? Is that not a concern that really plays into this tariff issue?
Absolutely. I mean, China is our biggest global competitor right now. That is a new phenomenon. At the same time, import tariffs on Chinese products are a lot higher than they are on European products, even with the 15%. So that works to our advantage. In addition, Chinese products suffer from a lot of other sort of import restrictions. There's a lot of also political problems that China has in the United States right now. So I feel good about the European position vis-a-vis China, even with the 15% import tariff, as long as it stays that way.
That is the question, of course. With what certainty can a business react to this framework agreement?
It's hard to say, to be quite honest. We only can do the best we can with what we have. I think it's worth noting that today is Monday. The announcement came out last night, and we don't have any, at least last I checked, we don't have anything in writing. We don't have any deal text. We don't have anything to hold in our hands. We just have announcements that have been made. So I suspect there are still details that are being worked out as we speak. I suspect we will get something in writing this week, and then we'll have a little bit more to hang our hats on. But I think, Donald Trump as the negotiator means obviously everything is untraditional. Everything is different than it ever has been. And I think I heard someone say, and I think this is probably pretty apt, negotiations with Trump have no beginning, middle, or end. They just sort of are all kind of rolling. So I think we have to, hope for the best, hope that we have a floor now, hope that our American customers are willing to sign contracts again. But of course, be prepared for further disruption if necessary.
Is that what it comes down to for businesses in your branch, for example? Is this idea of it's hard to find a point to sign a contract when you have this kind of moving target all the time? We hear so much about uncertainty and why businesses need certainty. Is that really what it is? Is that many businesses have just had a hard time really kind of actually writing these contracts, knowing what tomorrow was going to look like or 2 weeks from now?
Well, yeah, writing the contract is the easy part. The agreeing on the number that you put in the contract is the hard part. So, I think the psychology is sort of like, we're talking about, in many cases, multi-million-dollar investments. So a 10% tariff on €1 million is 100,000 euros. A 20% tariff is 200,000, and so on. So if a customer that's sinking millions of dollars into an investment can say, well, if I wait 90 days, maybe I can save 100 grand, then they might just decide to wait. And some of these investments are long-term, so they don't have to act now. They can wait 3 months, they can wait 6 months. So I think it's really about not necessarily understanding how the contract's going to be structured, it's understanding, where is my leverage and how can I get the lowest price possible? And if I can wait 90 days and get a lower price, then I might as well just do that. So that's what our members are telling us has been happening over the last quarter.
What does that mean for jobs concretely? Have we seen job cuts or the threat of job losses in your sector, in your branch in recent months due to this uncertainty?
Well, it's no secret that our industry and German industry writ large is undergoing some choppy waters right now. That has to do with the global economy altogether. The U.S. market is our largest export market. It is our largest investment location, but our industry is extremely well diversified around the world, and we're global market leaders in many of these fields. So even with the U.S. market being the biggest export market, it still only, quote unquote, represents 13% of our overall export volume. So we feel good about our diversification. I wouldn't say that the one bad quarter or one difficult quarter is going to have a big impact on jobs, and I think it's probably too soon to tell.
I want to wrap up by asking what kind of pressure this puts on the German government or on Brussels to make Europe more competitive.
I think a lot. I think this has been a topic that has been top of mind since before Trump came back into office. This was a big topic over the last few years for our association in Brussels and Berlin, is this whole idea of how can we as Europe and Germany be more competitive. And so I think this just focuses Europe even more on that we have to be more independent, we have to be more competitive, we have to be able to punch at our weight class on the world stage with big players like the US and China. So I mean, I think it just makes it all the more urgent.
All right, that's Andrew Adair with the German Machine Builders Association, the VDMA. Andrew, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.